And we are live.
I thank you for joining us tonight for our East Lansing Human Rights Commission meeting for February 3rd, 2021. Thanks for being here with us tonight. We have a big meeting going on here, and I want to thank staff in advance for their time as well this evening. In our opening, I would like to acknowledge the city of East Lansing occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi People's Land ceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. With that, I'll go on to item 1.1 of our roll call. Please, Shelley.
Sure. Just a reminder for commissioners, if you could please indicate where you are attending this meeting from, as we will follow the remote meeting policy that the city has. So city, county, state would be appreciated. Pat Cannon.
I am here in the city of East Lansing, Michigan, Ingham County.
Chuck Grigsby.
East Lansing, Michigan, Ingham County, remotely.
Karen Honey. Don't see Karen.
Karen did email me in advance that she will not make it tonight. I'm sorry, I didn't mention that earlier.
Oh, thank you. Carla McWhirter.
Here, attending remotely from East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan.
Liz Miller.
Remotely in East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan.
Crystal Davis Dunn.
Present, East Lansing, Michigan, Ingham County.
Vasan Sardar.
Present, East Lansing, Michigan, Ingham County.
Very good. Catherine Mifiotis Slavinsky is absent this evening, and Quentin Tyler noted that he would be absent as well.
Okay, we still have quorum. Thank you all again for joining us this evening. We'll move to item 1.2 to approval of the agenda of February the 3rd, 2021. If there's no amendments or edits, I'll look for a motion for approval.
I'll make the motion.
Moved by Commissioner Sardar. Is there a second?
Yes, Pat Cannon seconds.
Seconded by Commissioner Cannon. Is there any discussion on the agenda tonight? All those in favor, please say aye with the hand raised.
Aye.
Aye.
Chuck, your audio is fading away.
Thank you. Is that a little bit better, Commissioner Sardar? Thank you. Please let me know when I do that. My voice trails off sometimes, so I apologize for that. So moved for approval of Agenda 2/3/2021. We'll move to item 1.3, approval of the minutes of January 6, 2021. If there's no amendments or edits, I'll look for approval on that as well.
So moved, Pat Cannon.
Moved by Commissioner Cannon. Is there a second?
Second, Liz Miller.
Seconded by Vice Chair Miller. Is there any discussion in regards to the minutes of 1/6/2021? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. All right, we have moved our agenda around just a little bit for the sake of just being complimentary to our extra people here on the line. So we are on staff reports, item 2.1. Councilmember Bacon, did you have anything for us this evening?
Nothing new to report. I will have comment based on the East Lansing Police Department presentation and perhaps around the data presentation that was shared within the Police Oversight Commission and things along that line, but I don't want to step on or give any preview to the data they're going to be sharing in there. And so I'll reserve all comments for either during or in question on the police presentation.
Thank you, Councilmember Bacon, and please chime in at your leisure. So thank you. All right, staff liaisons, Hardy and Neumann, do you have any updates or any new information for us this evening?
I have nothing at this time, Chairman.
Just one thing from me, a reminder that tomorrow begins the 21st Dr. William G. Anderson Lecture Series, Slavery to Freedom. I've sent you the links. Hopefully you've had the opportunity to register for that event. I would also encourage the community to register the event as well. It's 3 separate speakers on 3 different dates in February. Excellent speakers around the topic of equality and inclusion, and how do we create excellent inclusion in our community. So there's a Facebook post from the City of East Lansing that promotes this event with a link on it where you can register. We encourage all of our community to do that. Take advantage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Neumann. So for the email you sent out to us, has everyone signed up for the slots, or is there still slots open for us individually to do the VIP stuff?
We do have 2 slots available yet for the first 2 speakers. So please email me if you're interested.
Yes, please do that. And then if you don't, I'll definitely sign up. I wanted to, give everyone an ample opportunity to participate because I did do it last year. But if that's something that you are even at all a little bit interested in, please sign up after this meeting, if you don't mind. If not, then your spot will be taken by moi here. So please do that. And I encourage you all to do that and sign up if you haven't done it already. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to item 3.1, a special presentation from East Lansing Police Department in regards to, in relation of the police complaints of 2020 by Chief Johnson and Deputy Chief Steve Gonzalez. I'll go ahead and leave it open for you.
Well, good evening, Chair and Commissioners. I appreciate you being here, and thanks for the invitation. And if you don't mind, Chair, if I can, I know some of the members on the commission, but if I can give a little bit of background of who I am and where I come from and things like that, just so we can have some common foundation. Is that permissible?
It's very permissible, and I apologize. I just acknowledge the fact that this is your first time with us and doing that in this format. So please, by all means, do what you got to do.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. As you know, I'm the new police chief here at East Lansing. I came from, actually, I was born and raised actually in Detroit, Michigan. And I went to school in Detroit and did Catholic education down in the city. Then I came up to Michigan State University back eons ago, and I got my bachelor's degree and my master's degree from Michigan State University. And my bachelor was actually in criminal justice, and my master's is in adult education, and both at MSU. I got hired on here at East Lansing as a police officer back in 1982, and I worked continuously for 30 straight years as a police officer here with East Lansing. I worked up the ranks, and actually I retired in 2012 as a police captain, and got into retirement life and enjoyed it very well. And I enjoyed my time in East Lansing, but I also enjoyed my retirement life also. While I was retired, I've been doing some, I teach for Northwestern University as an adjunct faculty member. I teach organizational behavior within police organizations, and also teach policy development. And all the people who I teach actually are police supervisors from around the country. And I've been teaching for them since 2007, but I started teaching a little bit more after I retired in 2012. So I left, and of course, we all know what's been happening around our nation and our country and things like that. And our police chief from East Lansing retired, I guess, last spring. And it was brought to my attention that there was a police chief opening it back where I did my policing. And one thing led to another. And for various reasons, you can ask me those questions later on, various reasons why I came back out of retirement. But one of the big draws back to the community, back to the police department, was what was the police department was going through, and also what our profession was going through. I was sitting on my couch pretty much every night watching this George Floyd thing unravel, and of course paying attention to the media, what was going on within the city of East Lansing with our issues in the city of East Lansing back last winter. And so some of those things actually pushed me back into policing, because I felt that I still had some stuff to contribute to policing, especially for my background and my experience with our particular city here. And one thing led to another. I applied for the job, and I got hired back on as the chief. And so I've been back here since October 5th of 2020. It's been a great ride to see people who I'm familiar with. It's been nice to get to know new people. I have some bumpy roads already, but I have a great staff who I have a great, when I say staff, I have the police officer staff. I also have the directors and Mr. Lahanis and support from council and things like that. So it's been great to be a part of that. I got to know some members of your own commission from a subcommittee I've been working with, I worked with back in the fall. And that was extremely beneficial to me and also to our department. So I just want to give you a little background of where I come from a little bit, and where I come from, and a little background of where I come to with the city and what I can bring to the city as the new chief. So as you know, in 2020, it's been a crazy year for our nation, crazy year for the world, and even crazy year for East Lansing. And as you know, we had one officer who had two adversarial contacts with our 2 community members in our community back last winter. And of course, that was some great concern that his behavior was examined pretty extensively, reference that behavior is what was going on with those particular contacts and things like that. And we'll talk a little bit about, I think you probably have our document already that is included in the document, but we'll maybe touch back on that a little bit today. But we had that situation even in East Lansing that has caused some concern from everybody involved, especially with this commission and the council and even myself. So with that, in the George Floyd and things like that, when I got here in October, we started to address some of these issues. And I started working with one of your subcommittees, dealing with a couple of different things that we were working towards, and your commission actually wanted to address a couple issues, and they were great to work with. And we had a chance to review some body-worn camera in the fall, and we also did some great work on the disorderly code ordinance that was passed by council at the end of the year, and that was with the help of your subcommittee and help of the police department. We actually, I don't know how many meetings we had, but we worked pretty hard to get that ordinance squared away. And it was interesting because it was literally, I probably was here for weeks when we started meeting trying to get these ordinance squared away. But so we had some great dialogue, and it was nice to hear the support that we were getting. Of course they had questions that we tried to answer the best way we could. But at least I can tell from their interest in the material we were covering that they had a concern for the citizens in East Lansing. And so when you hear that and you work with people that way, it makes you may not like the questions, but at least you know that they have the best interest of the city at heart. So that makes it a little more easy to digest, I guess. But it was okay. So that's pretty much what I just want to touch base on a little bit. You got and just start touching base on our document that we put in your packet. I think you received. I think it was great. The deputy chief will probably allude to it a little bit in a few minutes, but we were very appreciative of having the questions up front, so we can we can compile our report, and so we can get our report to you before the meeting, so that way you can actually read the report before tonight. And I think that may help maybe condense some of our discussions, and then hopefully be more questions instead of us going through this whole presentation and going through all the cases and things like that. But you have the cases in front of you, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But just a couple of things. We have been making some changes, and we'll talk about that. I'm going to have the deputy chief talk about some things that we've been doing since I got here, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But any questions you want to ask me right this minute before I have the deputy chief talk about some of our progression that we've made so far from our cases, from these cases that we're going to discuss a little bit later, some things that we've done because of those cases, and some things from our subcommittee we learned we want to make some changes. So we want to bring that up first so we can cover some of that stuff that may help with some of your questions going forward. So any questions right off the bat?
Yeah.
Commissioner Cannon?
Yes, sir. Chief, based on what you have seen so far and what you have learned about activities within the police department in the last year, you anticipate any adjustments or tweaks to either your screening for potential new officers or in your training?
Commissioner, you have a great question, because as I mentioned earlier, I teach organizational behavior and to other police officers around the country. And that hiring process actually becomes extremely important piece of how your organization runs. And so I was actually highly involved in our hiring process back before I retired in 12. And so I think that was another reason why I came back, because I actually had a hand in a lot of the employees who are currently still working here. And so I know the screening process that we put them through then. So I just took a gamble saying, well, if I hired all the cops before 2012, and the cops that we got on board from 2012 to 2020, I said, the chance of us still having a great police department is pretty high. And so, but going forward, Commissioner, that is going to be one of our things we're going to look at, to how we look at our culture of our organization. And we actually talked about that just this week.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Are there any other commissioners that had any specific questions to Chief Johnson at this time before Deputy Chief Gonzalez goes in? Yes, Vice Chair Miller, you're muted.
Yeah, since you have this dual perspective of history of the department and then sort of coming back in with a fresh set of eyes, what would you say is, you know, a unique strength of our department, and then one area where you were like, this is, you know, our growth spot?
Well, the strength is the people we have here, the ones who I know, who I hired before 2012. They are a great bunch of people. And I'm not just saying because the deputy chief's on the line here, but we worked together before. And if he wasn't the deputy chief, that would help me make a decision if I was going to apply for this job or not, because he's just a great employee. But that's one of our strengths. But on the flip side, though, one of my challenges is how young this department is. And we have a lot of officers who there's like 25 sworn officers who got 25. We only have 49 officers here. 25 of them were hired since 2012. And so then I have 7 out of 9 supervisors, 7 out of 9 sergeants are now off probation yet. And our probation for sergeant is 1 year. So I have 7 new sergeants who are still on probation. So talking about a challenge, dealing with our young officers and our young supervisors, we're trying to get our supervisors trained how to be good supervisors. They just became sergeants, and we got some lieutenants who are on probation also. So that's a huge challenge that's facing me right now. But I look at it as it's a great opportunity to develop them in the way I want them to be, what kind of supervisors we want. And that I look at it as a challenge, but I think it's a great opportunity instead of having a bunch of old supervisors who are stuck in the mud. So this is a great opportunity for us to create what we want to create here.
Thank you, Chief Johnson. Any other commissioners have any comments or questions for the chief? I just had a quick, you know, I know you came in, was it September, October, and you really had an ambitious goal with some of the community policing in the background you came in with, from what I understand. You know, I think you stated the number was 49, and I think at the time you were hired, we were probably at 52 or 51. Have some of those officers left due to the direct culture change that you're trying to incorporate with the department?
Well, that's a great question, Chair. I never had any exit interviews with one person left like the Friday. I started on a Monday, and one person left on a Friday before I got here. So it's interesting timing. And then 2 people left after I got here. I never had exit interviews, but they did leave here on their own decision, and they actually went into policing into surrounding jurisdictions, and the surrounding jurisdictions have much, and me personally, it's just my viewpoint on these communities, they're a tad bit more conservative, and their policing is a different kind of policing that we require down here in East Lansing. And I think with me coming on board and they were hearing what I was talking about, gut feeling, I think this may not have been the best fit for them. But I never had an exit interview with them, so I really couldn't say for a fact what they were thinking when they left. But they went to much more conservative communities that's nearby.
Thank you. And just my last follow-up, you had mentioned earlier that your police force is relatively young. And data kind of really confirms that, the newer the officers are, the more likely they are supposed to be in a situation where they have more contact with the community, just kind of based on them being new to the job and enforcing some of the different things they got going on. And we talked before this meeting here in subcommittee stuff that you have a probationary period for a lot of your officers. You talked about your sergeants being in the 1-year probationary period. Have you possibly re-looked at that policy in ways to maybe address some of the concerns that we've had traditionally with policing in the community as far as probationary periods and time people are kind of in that mode of really being fully vetted in their positions, or is that just something you're still working on? I know you're doing the accreditation process too, but I was just curious if you guys have addressed that at all.
Yeah, the reason I smile is because when I got here, one of my first goals, and the deputy chief can actually allude to this or comment on it. When I got here, I said, there's no way, sorry for my language, there's no way someone's gonna just get off probation just because they're gonna get off probation. And that's how it was back before 2012. You get hired on, you go through 12 months of, you can stay below the radar, you can do this and do that, and we sign off on your pay slip and you get moved on into permanent status, covered by the union contracts and things like that. I said, we're not gonna have any of that under my watch. So right when I got here, I started to interview and talk to all employees, civilian and sworn, who are on probation. So I talked to them at their 6th month, and then I talked to them again at their 11th month. And in that 6th month, I'm talking to them about what I'm expecting from them, what I want from them, and what our expectations are going forward. And they got these action plans they're working on. And so they got to meet these action plans, what they're working on. And then when I talk to them in their 11th month, then we'll see where they're at. And if I'm not happy with it, then I will talk to Ms. Neumann or George or wherever else, saying I need to extend this probation. If I'm not comfortable with them getting off probation, I'm not going to sign off on their probation. So I started that my first week I was here, started talking to our probationers and setting some boundaries on what we expect in under this new command staff. And so I haven't heard one way. They haven't had much choice. They have to come to the meetings and meet, but I haven't heard one way or the other. But they know that they're talking to me on their 6th month and also their 11th month. And so.
Thank you so much. Yes, Commissioner Davis-Dunn.
Just following up that, I was hoping that maybe a bit of this was going to be covered in the presentation, but with regards to performance standards, are there specific measures and, outside of meeting with individuals, new officers on probation, what are the policing or performance standards for officers off of probation?
Commissioner, that's a great question. We were not going to discuss that in our meeting tonight with your group, but it's a great question because we have contract negotiations that are going to be coming up. I think Shelley can help me. I think there's some of these contracts that are going to be renewed in 21. And so we have a committee, actually, one of my captains, I have one captain, he is chairing a committee with our employees. How are we going to look at those evaluations and how are we going to assess our performance? Because as the chair was asking, our community-based policing is going to look different and we're going to be capturing different kind of work. We got to capture the stuff that I'm asking to do, we got to capture it in a proper way. So we actually are going to be looking at the whole performance appraisal. And the one piece I'm going to be looking at really hard is our command performance appraisals, which is, for me, my standpoint, we haven't done a good job of evaluating our command staff. And so that's a little unacceptable in my eyes. And so my supervisors know that what my expectations are. And so we're going to be looking at that for the command union also. And it's a huge issue because it's just a huge issue here. And so that's the thing we're working on.
And I guess, I don't know if a report will be compiled, but that would be nice to be shared in some type of form of presentation regarding what you guys find or discuss in the study committee. And my follow-up question to that, these performance measures or standards, how are they established? What are they outcome driven? Are they productivity driven? And what are those specific kind of like targets or criteria that officers are required to meet with regards to productivity or outcome based off what those performance measures are?
I'm going to have the deputy chief chime in on that a little bit because I haven't looked at this year's the 2020 evaluations yet, but he has a little more familiarity with what we're capturing in 2020. So I would have him chime in a little bit.
Yeah, those specific data points are enumerated in the current police officer's contract. And so some of those are everything from traffic enforcement, shift appropriate activity, professionalism, case building, participation. Those are the different categories. And one of the things that we have is we try, or at least this appraisal has been around for a long time, so I can't speak specifically to why it was built the way it is, but just from my own interpretation of it, I think it's trying to straddle objectivity with, the numbers-based sole performance measures with subjectivity. So a individual's direct supervisor has the ability to provide that constructive feedback or that subjective feedback based on how they feel that the employee is performing. And then as far as what the levels of performance are, they're captured as exceptional, acceptable, or unacceptable. And that's one of the things that we've identified and why we're pushing towards this committee to try and redefine this performance appraisal is we think that those categories are rather thin. I think we need a broader expanse of grading levels, if you will, so that we can more accurately, give an employee some feedback on how their performance is.
Is there something shared in the presentation or another presentation that kind of list off what these performance appraisals categories are? And I what I've heard was more so they're around standards versus necessarily policing outcomes, especially if we're talking about community-based policing and public safety. And so, for me, when I think about what policing is and the purpose of having police officers, is not necessarily looking for crime, but it's prevention of crime. And right now, our current statistics, just shows otherwise. And so I just wonder how, or what ways are, we are tending to shift the model to more outcome driven based off how they're able to, either de-escalate, prevent like arrests or deter individuals from certain behaviors. I think from pattern or history that there is some over-policing and excessive policing that is not necessarily preventative, which creates, hostility or this kind of disalignment with police. But there are activities or behaviors of policing that is preventative that people actually learn from when, they are, arrested or, have a citation and things of that sort. And so that's a conversation I will, I guess, visit once we get through the presentation. I did read over the documents and some further dialogue that I wanted to kind of have. So, but thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis-Dunn. And I'll move to Deputy Chief Gonzalez for his portion of what he was going to discuss, if that's all right with the body.
Okay, so before I start with the presentation, I just did want to make mention, just to reiterate the chief's point about those probationary meetings, because I think those are extremely important. But that extends past just probationary employees. When the chief started here, on his second day, every command officer, myself included, had to provide him with our resumes. I think that was one way for him to get to know us, but also to take a look at our credentials and, you know, experience and education levels and things like that. So, you know, there is it's not like once you're off probation, it's just you're off scot-free, and, you know, you can, there's no checks and balances there. So, but we'll start with the quick PowerPoint presentation, and Justin can show that. And it's real brief, but we did want to go over a series of revisions that we've been going through here in East Lansing. You know, it started towards the middle or beginning of 2020 through now. And then we also wanted to give you a picture of what the department's vision is and where we're heading into the future. So we can go to the next slide. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about is policy and process. You'll notice in the complaint review document, there were two significant policy changes that are noted in there. And I'll touch on both of them here. The first one is our lien policy. By state lien rules, which is the Law Enforcement Information Network, the computer system that all police officers have access to, and they can access driver's license information, vehicle information, property information, that type of stuff. By state lien rules, an officer just needs a quote unquote law enforcement purpose to make a query into that system. That purpose can be an arbitrary purpose. So if I pull up to a red light and there's a car in front of me, I can run the license plate if I just want to check the registration information. That's by state rules. Obviously, there's a lot of concerns with that. And one of the policy changes that we made back in the summer of 2020 is that we no longer allow for arbitrary lien inquiries, especially with license plates. So we do require that to make a query, there has to be an articulable reason, an articulable law enforcement reason that you need to run that query and get that information. And we say that, you know, that can be open to interpretation, of course, but we say that because if an officer, I'll just use this example, if an officer pulls up behind a car and it's a red SUV, let's say, and in briefing or through the lien system or over through dispatch, the officer is notified that there's, you know, a stolen car that's been reported. It's a red SUV or a red Ford Explorer. That way the officer can articulate, I have a reason to run this license plate because of the information that I received previously on the stolen vehicle. So we did tighten up that policy to be a little bit tighter than what the state rules allow for. The next one is our response to resistance policy, what was formerly called the use of force policy. And that really has to do with two things. One, head stabilization. We have tightened that policy to say that we don't practice head stabilization as a measure of subject control. The only two instances where head stabilization or putting your hands on someone's head is going to be allowed is if the head is, and we use the terms of the offending appendage. So if the head is the offending appendage, or quite simply someone's trying to headbutt you, the officer can you know, defend themselves from that assault. Also, there are pressure points that would be allowed where you have to apply, or it's called pressure counter pressure. So if you press on a pressure point, you have to apply counter pressure to the appendage that you're applying the pressure point to, and that's one situation where head stabilization or touching someone's head would be allowed. The next one is the duty to intervene. We have always had a duty to intervene in our policy, but we have strengthened the language prior to last summer. The language in the policy said that if available or if practical, the officer has to, has a duty to intervene when they see excessive force being used. Now it's a shall. There is no out. I think under the old language, it definitely allowed for somebody to say, well, it wasn't practical for me, or I couldn't for whatever reason. Now there's really no out. If you see excessive force, you have to intervene, de-escalate the situation, and then, of course, there's the reporting aspect to it too. You need to report it to your immediate supervisor. We can go on to the next slide. The citizens complaint process, a couple things that we have changed. Prior to the change, we did not require a preliminary chief's review. Now, all citizens complaints that are filed with the department have a preliminary chief review aspect to it, where as soon as the complaint comes in, the supervisor who takes the complaint will compile the information. It has to go up to administration, and the chief has to be notified that this complaint came in. And then from there, it allows the chief to make a decision whether or not it's going to be investigated by us, investigated by another police agency, whatever the situation is. But it also provides the chief with good situational awareness of the complaints that are coming in, who's receiving the complaints, and what the circumstances of those complaints are prior to the investigation. So that's one change that we made with that process. The next one is our use of force reporting process. Prior to our changes, officers were always required to document their use of force in a police report. Generally, that occurred through the narrative section of the report, and then also by filling out a tab. Our police reports are electronic now, and they go across the top, the different tabs, and filling out what we call the force tab, which denotes what type of force was used and any comments that the officer puts in and those types of things. A few of the changes that we've made is that we require that by the end of the shift, any use of force incidents, doesn't matter what the situation is, have to be, we have to have a notification from the shift supervisor to police administration, and police administration does an immediate review of that use of force to make sure it was proper and documented properly as well. We also, on a weekly basis, report those use of force incidents to the city council through the city manager's office. We do that in a summary format. We don't send police reports over to them, but we summarize what the use of force reports were and send that on. We have now started reporting to the National Use of Force database. That is ultimately going to be a statewide requirement that is administered through the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police for certification processes. Chokeholds, those are deadly force. That is not a new change. Ever since I've been here for 23 years, a chokehold was equated to deadly force. And then we did do some subject control training on the head stabilization parameters when we made that policy change with our entire police department. We can go on to the next one. So this is where we're at right now. This is our current policing model. We are at 49 sworn police officers. That accounts for the chief all the way down to the newest hired police officer. We have hired 2 full-time police social workers. They came on staff towards the end of November, and we'll talk about them shortly. I think we provided information in the documents as far as what they're doing and some of the good work that we've seen from that program. We also have 4 part-time neighborhood resource specialists. The first 2 were hired back in December. The last 2 were hired in January. And those are part-time civilian positions. Their ultimate goal is to work on non-police related calls. So, when you think about quality of life in our neighborhoods, something that traditionally a police officer had to deal with because there was nobody else that we could send, we can now send these neighborhood resource specialists out to deal with non-law enforcement matters and also work on long-term solutions to some of these issues that we see crop up in the neighborhoods every year. The chief has started this goes on in line with our community policing program. The chief has started what's called neighborhood resource teams. We have 2 teams, East and West. Everybody at our police department, sworn and civilian, are assigned to these NRTs. And we have also reached out, the chief reached out to all of the directors within the city to bring people from their departments on board to these neighborhood resource teams. So housing inspectors, planning and building individuals, the fire department, you know, the library is even involved. So every facet of the city will be coming on board hopefully very soon to these neighborhood resource teams, and we can leverage each other's skills and abilities and expertise in working on more community policing type activities. We have reassigned and renewed our district officers. Everybody has always been assigned a district within the city. So the city map is divided up into different sections, different districts, and everybody's always had a district. But as the chief puts it, every district officer has to be married to their district. They don't work in the district all day long, but the goal is for those district officers to get to know and establish relationships with the community members that live there. Not just the neighborhood association presidents, not just people involved in the associations, but the residents that live there, and establish those relationships so that one, you know, we can partner more readily and more often with community members to address concerns throughout the neighborhoods. And then also we've officially launched our accreditation process. Back in mid-January, we submitted all the paperwork and we are moving down that process. We have about 9 individuals on our accreditation team, and you know, we anticipate that is going to be anywhere from a 15 to an 18-month process for us to get through the process. You can see here, I won't go through all the numbers because I know time is a concern. But this just gives you an idea of where our police social workers have been working. Again, we have 2 full-timers. One is an LMSW. The other one has a LLMSW, a limited license. And to date, as of last week at least, they have worked 42 different cases and referrals since you know, about mid-December, late December. And I broke out the data there of what types of cases they're working. And you can see what, you know, what they're responding to more often than not. And, you know, I can't say enough about our social workers. They have done a phenomenal job. They've been fully accepted into the police department, and the officers are seeing the full benefit to having experts work alongside them on some of these pretty high profile cases. Go to the next slide. These are just a few of the connections that our social workers have made. One of the big things with this program that we wanted to ensure is that we are not just East Lansing centric. We know that, you know, the social workers are going to connect and work with people that do not just live or work within East Lansing. People cross, you know, city borders and onto campus, off to campus all the time. And so they have been partnering with a lot of these different agencies and groups so that, you know, we can really start working towards a regional approach to some of the problems that the social workers have the expertise in addressing. Go to the next slide. Here's some of our targeted training that we are doing in 2021. This is certainly not an all-inclusive list, but we kind of broke it down here with some of the most important things. Of course, our citywide diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative that Ms. Hardy is spearheading. All of our police officers will be included in that. All of our civilian staff will be included in that. And as I understand it, the police employees will not be going through in a cohort, so to speak. They will be broken up, you know, with other people from various departments within the city. So I think there will be quite a bit of advantage to that, to hearing different perspectives and you know, gaining some real benefit out of the program, the training program. We are currently working on a regional crisis intervention approach. One of the things that we have found is that, you know, having police officers trained in crisis intervention is a benefit. It's a 40-hour class that the officers go through, and it helps them respond to the initial calls for, you know, someone that's experiencing a mental health crisis. The problem with that is that we can't train everybody in this. And so we have reached out to our partners at Michigan State University, the Ingham County Sheriff's Office, Lansing Police Department, to try and establish a regional approach to this so that each agency can draw from each other CIT trained police officers when needed. So if tonight, you know, East Lansing needs help from a CIT trained police officer, but we don't have one working, we can reach out to Lansing and they could send somebody, or the Sheriff's Office and they can send somebody. So we are working on that. And it sounds to me like everybody is on board throughout the county with going towards this approach. The other thing that we really want to work on this year and into the coming years is to make sure that we are dovetailing our de-escalation training with use of force scenario training. You know, our de-escalation training started a couple years ago, and it's classroom based. There are some scenarios that the instructors take the students through, but dovetailing it with actual use of force scenarios, setting up scenarios that an officer may find themselves out on the street in, and having them practice those de-escalation techniques is an area that we need to get better in. You know, the chief and I were talking about, you know, the fact that we've started the de-escalation training, but we really need to almost make that just second nature in how police officers work, and you know, just make that a fallback or a default, if you will, on how an officer approaches a situation. And then community policing practices. Currently, all of the officers and the supervisory personnel are assigned homework, if you will. We do have a couple of Department of Justice manuals on best practices in community policing that everybody is responsible for reading, and there will be follow-up on the practices and the objectives in those manuals. And you know, this is just another step in bringing true community policing to East Lansing that you know, we simply haven't had for several years. So, and I think that is the last slide there. I'm happy to answer any questions on the presentation, and if not, Chair, then we can move on to the complaint documents.
Yes, I believe Vice Chair Miller has some questions or a question.
Oh, sorry, my hand was raised too, but yeah.
Oh, Crystal, you can go.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, to be transparent, I have 6 questions. I think most of them are pretty straightforward and quick. So I'll just start at the top. Lien inquiries, are we tracking the inquiries? Has there been a decrease in the number of inquiries since we've implemented the policy, and what are those numbers?
That's an excellent question. And it's a question that the study committee has asked as well. Have we seen a decrease? We reached out to Lien Field Services and MyCGIN, Michigan Criminal Justice Information Network, and we are currently unable to run a query to see how many inquiries we were making before and how many we're making right now. But that's definitely an important data point for us to take a look at. We also want to see if that moves the needle at all on the demographics of the stops and contacts that our officers are making. Yep.
Great. Use of force statistics, how many times in the last year was use of force used by officers? And do we have the demographics of the citizens of who it's used on?
So I don't have that prepared tonight just because I was working off the document that we received a few weeks ago to prepare different data points. But I will say that those are questions that the study committee has asked as well. And so hopefully there should be answers to that question in their agenda packet, either from the last meeting or the meeting that is coming up on Monday. We don't have all of the answers. I will point out to you that one of the benefits of going through this process is that we've found discrepancies in our use of force reporting. One way that we can pull use of force is by what's called a case and arrest summary report. That's generated by those 4 digit file classes that you see. And we can also pull use of force statistics from a use of force report, which is generated from that force tab. And sometimes they don't talk to each other and they don't correlate. And so what we've done is we've started taking or doing a weekly audit to make sure that the 2 are the same. And if not, then we send those police reports back to the officers for correction.
Okay, thanks.
So
Oh wait, was
Commissioner, I think if we, some of these questions, some of these answers, actually, we may be able to get them like in a document, Word document to you for your next meeting next month. So at least we can follow up on some of your questions if we don't have it in front of us right tonight.
awesome. Yeah, I'll write those down and give them to Shelley so
Okay.
we can pass them on.
Okay, great, thank you.
You said that the 40 sworn officers was a reduction. What was the previous number and the reason for reducing those officers?
We were at 52 back in the fall, and we've had 3 officers. One was, he resigned. I don't know if you want to call it an early retirement or not, based on his circumstances. And then 2 other officers resigned and went to work for other police agencies.
Okay, so are those just vacancies or are we planning on keeping it at the 49?
I think we are planning on keeping it at the 49 at this point in time.
I think that's what Mr. Lahana says. We were able to fund the 2 social workers and the 4 neighborhood resource specialists out of those positions.
Great.
So it's right now we're not going to be replacing those numbers.
Okay. And are public school administrations part of the neighborhood resource teams?
Not at this point in time, but that's an interesting aspect. That's something that I don't think we considered. But yeah, that'd be a good outreach to them.
Yeah, that's going to be a long. That's a great question, because when I got here, before I left here, we had school resource officers,
right.
And now I come back, we don't have any school resource officers. So reaching out to the superintendent and going on that path, actually, it's a great avenue for us to pursue.
Yeah, because the resource officer plays a very different role than having a voice at the neighborhood resource team table. Might be same as the library has information about particular populations that schools might have wisdom about particular populations as well. What is there a model that we used when we incorporated social workers, or even if comparison to other cities, or how did we consult? Other than we hired them, we got them in, and it's going well. What did we reference in developing our model?
There were 3 big points that we looked at. One, we looked at if you're familiar with the CAHOOTS model out in Oregon, that's really kind of like that national standard of integrating mental health experts with law enforcement. That's one side of the spectrum where it's a very robust, big program. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that program even diverts calls into the 911 center to, mental health experts, and law enforcement's not even involved in that. So we looked at that to gain some insight and information on it. But we also looked locally. We reached out to the Lansing Police Department because they have 1 social worker on staff. They were really kind of the point of the spear when it comes to integrating a social worker into law enforcement in the local area. But we also reached out to the Michigan State University Police Department because they work pretty closely with their CAPS program on campus. And so we were able to glean some information from them as well. I will say, we don't have an expertise in mental health counseling in mental health intervention or crisis intervention. And so we are leaning very heavily on both of our social workers to build this program from the ground up and give us, that subject matter expertise that we need in order to make that program successful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Miller. I believe Commissioner Davis Dunn had a question or two.
Thank you. Yeah, she answered, asked a lot of the questions that I wanted to ask regarding the stats with lean and use of force, as well as the makeup of the resource team. And so it'd be nice to kind of have that in some type of written presentation. And then my other questions, thank you for asking too about the social work and the models. And I see you guys are adopting a critical or crisis interventions team. I think that's great. My other questions were around it, like you said that the social workers were responding to non-policing calls, and I wonder, is there a breakdown of the types of calls that are often placed that officers have been responding to in the past? Just to kind of see how those numbers have changed, and as well as I know that we're going to get into some data around police initiated encounters. And again, around those response to calls, what are the results of those encounters and things of that sort? So I don't know if you have any data or any information.
Short of what's on the slide, I don't really have any data as far as what kind of calls they've been responding to. I did break out the different types of calls and case referrals that they've worked on. It is very, very early in the program. And so we hope that in the coming months and of course the coming years, we're going to have more robust information to show, okay, these are the types of things that are shifting from that traditional law enforcement response over to the police social workers. I can tell you, of course, some of the situations that we respond to that have a mental health component to it can be very dangerous initially. And so that's why I said, quite often we're finding that there's a joint response where the police officers go, the social worker goes, police officers get there, and the situation is safe, and either the officers stay for whatever reason, or we have had instances where our social workers have looked at the officer and said, I think we're good, we're fine. And the officers can clear the scene and the social worker does their work there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's, essentially in a model of the crisis intervention, like training and with policing and mental health. And, but yeah, it'll be nice to kind of capture just data on the types of calls that, are placed in for law enforcement, and then how, it's discerned whether or not it goes to a social worker. And so just looking at statistics and just getting baseline data so that we can see how we're moving the needle, and how the strategies and things that you guys have implemented have changed. And then I don't know if you guys are gonna publish what the community policing model is or standards are for this community on the website, so that civilians know what to expect from officers and from encounters with officers. And then I think one of our goals was to try to put together some best practices for civilians when they encounter officers, of what their expected compliance or conduct should be.
Thank you. Councilmember Bacon, please go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thank you guys. And having talked to Steve and Chief Johnson before, the stuff you guys have done on systems, I mean, I don't know how you got this much. This is off the charts amount of stuff that you've done in a very short period of time. I just want to give you kudos and say thank you for this. This is a Herculean effort. Secondly, I'm all about systems typically, but in policing, it's an area that's a little bit different. And the challenge is, it's a one-man operation, and how do we really impact culture on the one-on-one? And I know Elaine's plans for our entire group and those types of things. These are just comments and anything else. I guess when the people are out there working, and when I hear community policing, I usually think that's positive, but I know that can go a lot of different ways, where community policing kind of creates a fortress and defining who's the community. And from my perspective, and I'll speak for council in general, I consider East Lansing, we're small town, but we're also global. We're also national. We're also all those things. And it's super easy to end up on CNN, right from little old East Lansing. So when we're talking about community policing, anyone residing, doing business, or simply passing through. And I think in a lot of these ways, there hasn't been a big issue around who resides here or doing business here. I think it's the issues around who's passing through and who is the community. So I think that's the big challenge, what we do on the hearts and minds side. And I know we have a lot of initiatives in place around there. At this point, with what you've presented, I have no doubt from a systems perspective, we're not going to have any issues. You're beyond where I thought we'd be right now in systems, but the challenge now on the hearts and minds side, and that'll be stuff we have to continue to work on and partner. And with Elaine's department, that's the big challenge. And that's just my kind of big picture view, because I want to protect the officers as well, because as we see even today, we're one incident away. It's a one and done type of scenario, and it's very challenging. So that's my take.
Just want to respond really quick on the council members. And I appreciate your acknowledgement on the work we have. I just want to follow up on that really quick, because this is going breakneck speed. And I've had my own command staff. They look at me sometimes and say, "Hey, Chief, could you slow down a little bit, because we're drinking out of a fire hose already." So I'm dumping out. I'm dumping the reading books and things like that. And they like, okay, so I appreciate your acknowledging they are taking on a different load, and good or bad, but we know this. I know this is the best way to go. I don't know if it's going to work this time around. It worked back in the 90s, but we're going to do our best while I'm here. So.
Thank you, Chief Johnson. Before we go to the next phase, Deputy Chief Gonzalez, I think Commissioner Davis Dunn has a follow-up question.
I'm sorry. And I do, since, October, that's a lot of change. So thank you again for the work that you guys have been doing. Thank you, Councilman Bacon, for highlighting that. Because we were nodding our heads through the presentation, like, wow, that's great. And so I don't want to discount the work that you guys have been doing, and I don't know if my other questions I just remember I had is more appropriate after you do the complaint summary, but I also, the memo that was written with regards of all, the changes that you guys made. And I was just curious about truth in Titus diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings. I don't know if there's any baseline data and kind of what those trainings look like. I know that it says that they are ongoing. I don't, know the frequency of that as well. I know you also talked about exposing officers. It says like museums and training centers. I don't, again, what that looks like, what those opportunities look like. I also saw that the stats for some of the trainings, it was like 84% of officers had attended. And I was wondering about the rest of the officers that didn't attend, if there's a criteria makeup, so that to make sure that when all of these officers are out in the field, that they all have a baseline understanding, expectations of conduct. And then, so these are a lot of questions, but they can come and follow up in writing, but I just wanted to put them out there in the record. You don't have to respond to them now. Again, you talked about accreditations and kind of changing the standards of hiring. Just curious about what are some of those characteristics that you guys are looking for, and then with the policing, like performance evaluations, outside of reporting, you know, in conduct, if those are measures, are you guys assessing for their mental fortitude, you know, around stress, like their mental resilience, you know, assessing for their belief in ideology, you know, around race, what crime is or who criminals are, about poverty, why poverty exists, things of that sort, their capacity for compassion. Working as a public servant myself, in human services, their compassion fatigue is a thing. So I don't know if you guys are assessing for those things, or, you know, and these are things that I feel, you know, social workers could assist with, or, you know, bring in other agencies that can support those. And so, yeah, I'm a stop there. And oh, well, one more comment around you talked about command performance, like supervisors and things of that sort, training them. I know you say you have 7 new sergeants. Are they being used like as reflective supervision, like supervisors? Are they out in the field, or are they there typically just to supervise for the shift? And I was wondering also if there are demographics, or like the number of officers per shift, and the number of calls that officers are expected to respond to per shift, and how their productivity is measured for their shift. And again, the roles of the supervisors around coaching, reviewing, and things of that sort. So, but
Thank you, Commissioner Davis-Dunn, and I appreciate you being able to help us out with having all those questions, and then we can get that in a different format. Shelley, did you catch all that? So we can follow up and make sure that we can get those questions that she raised addressed. Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to the second portion of the report of the summary.
Chuck, real quick.
Yeah, please go ahead, Councilmember Bacon.
Actually, those are all really good questions. Any of those questions we could get in the written format that could be answered and responded, and then kind of been brought through its written communication to the Police Oversight Study Commission, I think would be great. Because I think you asked a lot of questions that would be relevant to the questions that were already asked. Just kind of a question, answer, written communication, and then forward it forward. You would obviously be copied on it here, and then forward it. See if we could forward it. Is that sound doable?
That's very doable, Councilmember Bacon, and I definitely support that. I did have a lot of I did send an email out to all the people in the study commission to view us tonight, so hopefully they'll be able to see what we have to offer tonight. Before we move on to your summary report, Deputy Chief Gonzalez, I just had one quick question about the district in the community engagement that you guys are doing with the redesign. I guess my question is what is the expectation? Like, how do you expect an officer to do that? I know that officers have a lot of downtime in between certain calls and things like that. Do you guys have anything formally set in place about how to be able to engage with the community in their own districts? Outside, like you said, the neighborhood associations and things like that. If you don't, then I definitely would recommend some way of giving the officers to do something like that, tools to be successful, so you can really increase the percentages of engagement that you guys expect from them going forward. You don't have to really address it now for the sake of time, but maybe that can be included into the written stuff as well, as far as kind of really what your ideas around that is, and how you can get officers to really engage in the community, because I think that's one of the toughest aspects of what an officer has going on today, is how do I get engaged with the community? How do I have a conversation with someone if I'm not arresting them or put them in handcuffs? How do I positively have this interaction? And I think if you just expect them to do it without any kind of formalized process, the percentage of success go down quite a bit. And that's just my humble opinion. But I'll defer to you in your next part of your presentation.
No, Chair, I agree with you on that. That's going on. That's one of our next task, because those district duties are critical, and that's part of the book that they're reading right now. Reference what some of those duties are, and it is important because like Commissioner Crystal mentioned, reference, trying to make sure that their work is capturing their performance appraisals going forward. And that's going to be it's going to be a lot of work for us, but they do need to know what we want them to do in those districts, and so that is coming down there for more homework for them. So
can I add this to the list of questions and around that, or a suggestion, if the requirements for engagement with the community is a part of their shift duty, I think that may be a way to implement that. I know certain shifts, like it's slow, there's not a lot of activity. I have more questions around encounters once we get into those statistics. I forgot what other question I had. Never mind, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis-Dunn. Now, in regards to the complaint summary report, Deputy Chief Gonzalez, you were planning on talking about that, is that correct? Or one of you guys?
I was going to ask, I mean, it's fairly lengthy, of course.
Yeah, I was going to make a suggestion.
How do you want to approach it?
Thank you for asking. I was going to make a suggestion to the commission, due to the length and the type of information that's in there, from what you have read prior to this meeting, if you have questions about specific incidences, we'll probably start with that and work our way backwards. I think it'd be a little bit more productive as opposed to you going through every single one of those on your own. Not to say that that's not important, but I think for the sake of time and to really get substance from this discussion, I think if we can address specific questions that commissioners may have, may be the best approach. So I will open it up. Do any commissioners, based off the summary report, have any specific questions to the complaints that you did see in the summary? Yes, Commissioner Davis-Dunn, and then Vice Chair Miller.
Okay, I'll let Vice Chair Miller go first because she might ask the same question.
To start with, I just had one in interpreting the report. When you guys list the previous violations for the officer that had a complaint against them, did that include that complaint? Like if it's 20-4, that includes that complaint, or that's in addition to that complaint?
That includes that complaint.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, so
please go ahead, Commissioner Davis-Dunn.
Okay, so, and these are citizen initiated complaint investigations. I was more so curious about the categories. It says, like 5-year complaint trend, and it talks about, the different types of complaints. And it doesn't necessarily give the status or outcome, of that 5-year trend. And then the admin inquiry trend, like what sparks that? So like there was one incident where the officer resigned after a shift, supervisor told him to what's the word I'm looking for? Back off a pursuit. And, there was, some, he was reprimanded and decided to resign. But that was a admin, initiated investigation. And I'm curious, how are those kind of like typically triggered? That's the question.
So the citizen's complaint investigations and an administrative inquiry is done the exact same way. It's like you said, it's what triggers it that defines which category it falls into. So if a person walks in our door or calls us, sends us an email, notifies us that they had an interaction with a police officer or one of our employees, it doesn't have to be an officer, and they were dissatisfied with whatever that interaction was and file a complaint against the person, then it falls into the citizen's complaint category. An administrative inquiry, the best way I could equate that to or explain that is think of it as an employee issue. We have very specified ways that we have to go through an investigation because of contractual requirements and longstanding practices. But it's the origin of where that complaint or where that issue comes from. So an admin inquiry, you'll see in 2020, we had a couple issues where we found that people weren't being truthful on their time cards, if you will.
Sorry.
And that, that's not where someone, a resident or a community member came in and complained against them. We, became aware of it and had to do this inquiry to find out what was going on. So that's how the two types fall into each category.
So I saw that, the time card, I saw the issue with around, and so I wasn't quite sure the policy violation for the officer that had the domestic dispute that the person the officer allowed the suspect to strike or push them again. But it noted that she had a policy violation. But it doesn't talk about what that policy violation was. And then, I don't necessarily see, there's another officer who had, about like the discharge of a weapon, of their weapon against another officer or something of that. But I wonder what other are things of trigger. So I guess it ties back into those performance measures to start, and you talk about those performance plans and expectations that are set forth. Is that a part of those, administrative triggered inquiries? Are those things, reports that are going, listed? Because, usually when there are people not following policies, they're not following policies within the department and out in the field, like procedural conduct wise too. And so I'm just wondering, as a part of the evaluation process, other than, noticing something is off or another officer reporting that someone did something, how are you guys going about inquiring about standards of conduct regarding officers?
So regardless of whether it's a citizen's complaint or an administrative inquiry, if the complaint is sustained and there's resulting disciplinary action against the employee, that is factored into their annual performance appraisal. It's not separated from that. That is noted. So I guess, we're getting kind of to the point of how do we track those trends? How do we track, employee behavior if they're going down the wrong road? That is one way to do it. Now, our current performance appraisal process also has a 6-month review. So at 6 months, they get a mid-year appraisal, and then they get their annual appraisal at the end or the beginning of the following year. So it gives the employee supervisor an opportunity to intervene, if you will. 6 months is a long time, though. I think we can all agree on that. And one of the things that we've talked about in study committee quite a bit, and I think one of the things that we all want to work towards is having an early warning system of some form that is a little bit quicker on the ball of intervening in problematic behavior. So there's a couple different facets to it there, but just because the complaint process and sustainment of complaints and disciplinary progress does not live separate from a performance appraisal, if that's the short answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis-Dunn. Thank you, Deputy Chief Gonzalez. If we don't have any other questions from any other commissioners, yes, Vice Chair Miller, please go ahead.
Yeah, do we have any method? So how do we track these outcomes? Are there comparable cities in terms of comparable size or demographic that we compare the amount of complaints we receive, the type of complaints? Like, is there any sort of relationship or something that we can, like, how do you know, 1 year it's 3, 1 year it's 6, what is the measurable for what we look at?
Yeah, we currently don't compare our complaints with what another city or another comparable city may be getting and the types of complaints they may be getting. We do kind of compare ourselves against ourselves, if you will, from year to year. Of course, if we have a year where complaints spike, that's a red flag. We need to take a look at that, what caused it. But right now, we don't have anything in place where we reach out to, Port Huron or Midland or another city fairly our size with a police department that's similar in structure and say, hey, what are your complaints? We're kind of looking at what we do.
Yeah.
We don't have that in place right now.
And since you do, compare it against yourself, and this is my 4th time of sitting with, Deputy Chief Gonzalez and past and current chief, and on this commission, I would love to hear from you all of what is the story these complaints tell about policing in our city. Yeah, what are we learning from this big picture?
Can I add to that question really quick? Because I was noticing about civilian initiated complaints is like race of the officer, sex of the officer, and then the complainant has something to do with that. And then, many of them are, unsustained, unfounded or whatever. But, that unspoken type of nonverbal behaviors and like microaggressions and stuff that, people of color experience, whether, the officer realizes it or not, and their officers are humans. They have things that happen in their, private life that unconsciously they may bring to work and, might be a trigger when they're working with certain individuals. But yeah, back, to Vice Chair Miller's question, like looking at the complaints and the trends and things of that sort, what narrative is it? Are the complaints telling? And then even if the complaints are substantiated or whatever, are there interventions for officers? Are there things, takeaways, reflective processes that the officers go through when they had a civilian encounter that civilian felt like they were treated unfairly by that officer? And then my other question was, I know around the contract negotiations, performance standards and all that other stuff, are there any built-in incentives? Because this change is hard and it is a lot of change, and but are there any incentives to offer officers, or like any recognitions or things that are given for officers that are meeting standards or that are exceptional as well? Because it kind of does feel like they're being punished, but it's really wanting to get it right and and do better and looking for opportunities to build upon.
So if I could just touch on that, to kind of go back to Commissioner Miller's initial question, like what is this story that we're figuring out? It's really hard for me to give you that story without sitting down and taking. I'm a slow worker, I think, sometimes, and I like to read everything and make sure I'm getting it right, I guess. But it's hard for me to encapsulate that here without sitting down and looking at the trend of our complaints and really who's getting the complaints, what are the situations that the complaints are generated from. But I think that dovetails with your point, Commissioner Davis-Dunn, that sometimes complaints are triggered not because we're intentionally doing something wrong, but it's the way we may approach a situation. As an officer, of course, body language, tone of voice, all those things come into play. And I think, especially if that's your first impression with an individual, that may, create the scenario or the environment where the contact kind of goes south from there and a complaint arises. So that's one of the things that we would want to look at. Are some of these complaints being triggered because of, I don't know, whether it's a miscommunication or something that, we're doing unintentionally that maybe we can get better at. Another thing that the chief has talked about is with our social workers. I think there's an opportunity there where they can be used not just outward looking towards the community, but also turning them around and having them engage our officers, our entire staff on a variety of topics, whether it's, social health or mental health, whether it's, you talked about compassion fatigue. If someone is compassion fatigued, if someone is stressed out and burned out and they don't take a step back off the line, you're going to have complaints against that individual. And so, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. This is going to be a long journey for us, I think. I keep telling people that we're seeing a sea change in law enforcement that is needed. And some people agree and some people don't agree. But, the fact of the matter is that we are going through a transition and you can't turn the ship on a dime, unfortunately. But so that's the long answer, I guess, to your questions. I don't know if it really answered your question, but hopefully
We appreciate that, Deputy Chief. No, we appreciate that. Thank you. It's a big questions, I should say. I think we'll move on to Chief Johnson. Yes, Commissioner Cannon, go ahead.
One more question, and this isn't so much about complaints. With 49 members of the police force, I'm sure that provides lots of opportunities to reveal opportunities for improvement. Also, a chance for your officers to demonstrate incidents where they've gone above and beyond. What is your system for how you deal with commendations that you receive about particular officers or the department in general?
So, Chief, you want to field that one?
Yeah, sure. I was on mute. Sorry about that. Commissioner, I appreciate that. We actually, the biggest thing that we have right now to recognize our employees is we have a yearly award ceremony. Mm-hmm. Where we look at their behaviors, we look at what they do, we look at our thank you cards in these officers' files and stuff like that. And we actually we have a big ceremony normally, and we recognize that good behavior, recognize the people who recognize them. You'd be surprised how many things these officers and civilians do within a year that we recognize. And actually, we have one coming up on February 17th. And we're going to try and live stream it. And when we get that information squared away, we're going to get that live stream for the whole community to see, not just our own police department. So we want to showcase some of our employees. We didn't do it, but a couple of civilians had life-saving. They saved someone's life off of Lakeside. Someone fell into a pond, and we recognize these two teenagers who. So everyone needs to see that. We don't have enough. We don't have enough things to we don't have enough awards to give out to the good performances. And so I took some notes with Commissioner Davis-Dunn talked about this incentives for good behavior. We don't have any right now built into our system, but that's something we never tried it before, but that's why your commission is here to help us too, to give us some ideas to going forward. So it's a great idea. So We have, right now, we're just doing our award ceremony once a year, but if you have more ideas, we'll take them.
Thank you, Commissioner
Chief.
Cannon. Thank you, Commissioner Cannon. We're going to move into Chief Johnson, for the sake of time, into the contact taxes so we can get that section wrapped up real quick. Did you want to talk about that report? Give us some context to what you found in there or what you didn't find in regards to your memo of Chief Johnson?
Oh, I'm sorry. My memo, that was to the officer initiated contacts. Is that what you're talking about, Chair?
Yes.
Okay, right. Yeah, it was just a little, some concern because our numbers, and I'm not going to get into, I think you have all documents in front of you, but basically we had, I'm just using an example, like in January, February, March, our officers from the department standpoint was stopping African Americans, over 20% of the raw numbers and things like that. And then there was a lull during the year because of COVID and other issues. And then, of course, I get on board again, and I come on board in October, and all the stuff that has happened from not just in our department, but in the world, everything that's been happening from the spring, the summer, and our issues from last winter, and everything that's been going on with the police department under a microscope and things like that. These numbers, January, February, October, November, December, were some of the same numbers that were back from January, February, March. So we saw these numbers, and I saw these numbers, and it was like, it was not that not much work has been done, tons of work has been done, but we looked at these numbers like, well, these numbers are about the same from the end of the year than were at the beginning of the year. So I'm a cop by trade. I'm not a statistician or anything like that. I talked to my boss, and we have a committee, Ms. Hardy and Ms. Neumann, and of course, Deputy Chief, we had some discussions about this, and I don't know the answer. I kept telling Mr. Lahanas, I don't have the answer to why these numbers are this way. And so the city manager has authorized us to release a RFP within the week to go out and seek someone to come in and do a study on our department, reference gathering data, not related to the police. I mean, we hire someone who is not related to the police, of course, someone who gather data, who are trained to do what they gotta do and help us with these numbers. And I don't know what the numbers should be. And so I was just concerned with my memo reference, well, the numbers are the same. So why are the numbers the same? So that's why my memo to my boss referenced why the numbers are the same. And so that was concerning to me. And so I just want to make sure that my boss knew that we're not taking this lightly. We're going to just look into see what's going on. And if this independent vendor or company who comes in and looks at everything, and I told Mr. Lahanas that this may not happen in a year or two, but we have to find a baseline. And if these numbers are way out of proportion and we are doing something that we shouldn't be doing, that becomes my responsibility of dealing with those issues. If we are doing something, if the numbers come out that we're not doing anything wrong and things like that, then I guess that's something we need to look at also, that these numbers are fairly appropriate to our type of community. And so, but I have no answer. So I guess that's my memo to my boss saying, I don't have the answers. So could you give us some time? And actually, I think he's gonna give us some money also, reference we can be able to release this RFP to do this study. And so I just asked for everyone's patience for us to gather some objective data to help drive us going forward. And so I guess that's to sum up my memo a little bit to you.
Thank you, Chief Johnson. Did you have something you wanted to add, Commissioner Davis-Dunn?
Thank you so much for that and explaining the data there. And that, that's kind of what I noticed. And I was trying to do a comparative analysis of the trends around resident versus non-resident. I'm also concerned about this unknown category. I wonder who makes that determination of that person's racial category status. And it's like, I don't see any trends for like Hispanic encounters. But thank you for making that inquiry and, to have, some type of community assessment or organizational assessment as to what's, happening here. And I think this, touched on Vice Chair Miller's question about the complaints and what the narrative is, what the story is telling. And so even around this cultural alignment piece, and still looking at the stats, we have, outside of policing behavior, we have to also look at these cultural components and how culturally African Americans, Black people, people of color have been criminalized. So when Deputy Chief Gonzalez was saying regarding the lien, having to have like some type of valid reason for running a person plate, and that's a shift that made a shift, and hopefully there's been a decline. But when we talk about suspicious behavior, what makes someone suspicious? What are the, how are these contacts or the initiation, like what's the trigger for these initiations or contact encounters with officers? And I think that was one of the initial inquiries of the subcommittee when we're looking at use of force, of like what triggered, again, the encounters, like what made it suspicious, because even when we did the disorderly conduct, that part of contention we were on around resistance, and that resistance is not technically, to resist is not illegal, but it's at the point in which, it's a, officer contact or encounter or presence. And the same thing with the use of force continuum. Like there's no neutrality there. It just assumes that every encounter between a police officer and a civilian is, there's, it's hostile, and that is just not true. And so it's really having to, in my opinion, really tie in cultural implications and practices or mannerisms or behaviors of individuals, because I think that ties that in. And then looking at the fact that even when personal experience, visiting my brother at MSU and driving up here late and, pulled over, suspicious. You're driving around 9 p.m. at night. You look like you're lost. I can tell you're not from this community. I'm pretty sure they ran my plate. And, requiring me to get out the car was like all these questions. And because, for me, in my opinion, whether they had a valid reason or not, that they were concerned that I was lost, was that I didn't belong in the community. The current US statistics or data for this community is that African Americans is like 6.5%. And so, I don't know what, again, officers or what the policing behaviors or standards are for, suspicious behaviors or activities, and how that ties into kind of cultural practices and like the trends and I saw that there was a decline and then there was an uptake, between the months. But, I feel like there's some correlation there around, again, like just how people travel, like, cause it's, I feel like majority of the contacts are non-resident. So anyways.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis-Dunn. Before I say anything, I'm gonna go ahead and let Vice Chair Miller speak. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, since the city is already contracted with Truth and Titus Collective to do, diversity, equity work in trainings, have they been consulted in terms of what they might recommend or what path they might recommend the police department to take in examining our contact stats and moving to decrease those, given the high percentage of particularly African Americans that are stopped or?
So Steve, do you want me to go ahead and try to take that question? So our approach is holistic. So we are not looking at police data in regards to how we're informing the cultural realignment piece. We're really kind of looking at the full attitude of the city as a whole. And Steve mentioned earlier that we are not segregating the police from the rest of the city population. So as we go through this cultural realignment, the police won't go through it as the police. They'll just go through it as city staff.
Oh, yeah, I understood that. I meant more using them as a resource of saying like, we're looking for an outside thing, or we're trying to figure out where to start. Do you have any recommendations? Not even like using them, but just as, you know, a resource that we already.
To ask questions around how we can find independent people to look at our data. Is that yes.
Yeah, or what they would even, what they might recommend. Yeah.
So they're not looking at the data, but we have asked questions about naming independent individuals who are not associated with policing to look at how we might be able to interpret our data that makes sense for the information that we have. So yes, we've talked to them about that.
Okay.
Actually, just very recently.
Yeah. So for me, when I see this, like systems are complicated, right? And they're multifaceted, and like absolutely the changes that Chief Johnson, you are implementing are awesome and quick paced. And when I see the statistics, both for the whole of 2020, including in the fall, there are certain parts of that system that have a lot of catch up to do, because when we look, you know, that a higher percentage of African Americans are stopped, way higher than East Lansing population percentage of African Americans, higher than Lansing's population of African Americans, higher than Ingham County's population. That to me tells a story of like there's a problem, and it matches the stats. We don't always need stats to know the culture, to learn. Like that is one method of learning the culture, and the anecdotes that have consistently come out from both residents of color and wider regional residents of color who either drive through the city or work in the city, and their experience with policing and over policing and their interactions with policing feel like they're really supported by the contacts and the percentages in there. And it's hard. And I would encourage the police department to not start with the question, you know, what should those numbers be? But with the assumption like something's broken here, how are we moving to fix it? Rather than like, what's the percentage that's reasonable? Because, you know, reasonable is whole harmony. Every part of the system, including our residents, are working together so to minimize stops, and there might be some flex in that, but it looks like it's way out of proportion. Yeah.
Thank you, Vice Chair Dunn. And I just want to follow up before I get to Councilmember Bacon, if you don't mind, please.
Miller.
So we had a redesign, redevelopment, recommitment starting this summer with our police in how we interact with the community. And, you know, when it comes to this data and we talk about stories, and we talk about some of the different things that we are seeing already, where I don't feel like we need to get an outside benchmarking process. We don't need to understand more data to understand that, you know, if you live in East Lansing, you're 2-3 times more likely, if you're an African-American person, you're going to get officer-initiated contact. If you're not from East Lansing, you're passing through, going to work, going to school, whatever, it's 3 to 4 times that you're likely to get stopped. And that number in comparison dwarfs other surrounding cities and municipalities in the way that officers are going about just traffic. We haven't got to the use of force yet. We're just talking about traffic-initiated interaction that is disproportionately focused on minorities. I mean, that's very, very clear. And it's been happening for a very long time. And as the information and as the work we've been doing, all of us together, staff included, those numbers have only confirmed a lot of what people have been subjected to in the community. And so I challenge, just based off where we're at now, that we really look at that and build off of that, because the numbers don't lie. And it's very, very difficult for someone who lives in this community, a person of color, to feel like that public safety has their best interests at hand when they're having these discrepancies based on the color of their skin. And I'll leave it at that. And I just really want to chime in and add to that, because it's not very complicated. And it starts from the top. And it really starts with having a standard in a way where we're just not going to have this happen within our department. This is not acceptable.
Yeah, Chair, you have a great point. Reference that, like Commissioner Cannon mentioned. You reference this the organizational culture is critical, and we are serious about that culture. What we're doing, it does start. It starts from day one. Reference where we're teaching our employees in the police academy, how we hire our employees, like Commissioner Cannon talked about, and that whole concept is a whole part of this what's going on in the city. And so it's a great challenge for us. But we can't just look at one piece or two pieces of the puzzle and things like that. It is a big system there. But we're willing to look at the whole piece of the puzzle there.
Thank you, Chief Johnson. And I understand this is very complex. It's not very straightforward in some ways. It really isn't. It's very systematic. It's a long line of a battle that we'll have to continue working on. So please don't get it wrong that I'm trying to minimize how much of the challenge that it is. But it is very, very, very disturbing to have what we are seeing be confirmed with the information that we have going forward. And I'll stop there. Councilmember Bacon and then Commissioner Davis-Dunn, please go ahead.
Yeah, the data, I mean, obviously not too shocking. When I saw the initial data, to me, my brain initial thought was welcome to Earth. But the issue is kind of the branding problem. And I know they were saying it kind of starts at the top. My gut level feeling doesn't start at the top. The risky thing in policing is it actually starts at that 49th man. You know, it's either all of it or it's none of it. You know, it's really, you're going to do what you're going to do from the top. And my gut feeling and impressions, and knowing both of you at this point rather robustly, I have no doubt the things are going to be in place from the top down. It's just how that those links and those chains don't break. And here's the challenge, and I'd state this for officers. I think what happens in a culture like that, when data like this comes out, we already have a branding problem. We want officers to get home alive. We want the stop person to get home alive. Now, with this type of data that confirms many people's fears, now you have a heightened encounter. East Lansing, you're coming into the community on high alert, and the encounter is already heightened. Now it's heightened in a very different way than it's like, oh, I made it to the edge of town, I'm in Lansing, kind of thing. That's the danger. That's the real, that's the rub for the police force, and the reason to change is we don't want them having heightened encounters either, where every single person who encounters them is assuming bias, assuming an unrighteous stop, assuming all these other things on the other side in the car as they're approaching. Now everything's heightened, you know. So there's the turn of key right there, and how we fix that. You know, I don't know what to do with that part of it, but that's the agreement that has to be made with law enforcement here. They don't want heightened encounters. They want to get home safe at night. Everyone wants to get home. You know, how we resolve that, I don't know in the culture, but that's an issue right now, because that's what's happening out there. And something deadly or less than deadly or a bad encounter would just decimate all of us and be devastating to the community. So that's my fear.
Thank you, Councilmember Bacon. Commissioner Davis-Dunn, please go ahead.
Thank you, Councilman, for that. That's exactly it. I think we understand what the issue is. I think we're trying to learn and figure out why. And I think we understand a part of that narrative of the why. I think Councilmember Bacon touched on that, those heightened experience and triggers. And then we're trying to determine the how do we resolve it? How do we change these? And so, like a part of my studies and research is organizational community assessments analysis. And so we have this quantitative data, but again, the quantitative data only show trends, themes. It doesn't explain, the why, and so what is needed is a qualitative, like analysis of the data. We need, qualitative data surveys. We also, I think the opportunity here with amongst like the your 7 new sergeants and supervisors and the social workers here is to start, evaluating and looking at the encounters and looking at what are the civilian behaviors, according to the officer that triggered the encounter, and start breaking those down as they apply to these kind of unconscious biases, or even to the point of how laws are written. And it might be a twofold approach too, with educating again civilians on their rights, on what to expect, and reframing this concept of normalcy and suspicion and things of that sort, to remove stereotypes in this kind of white normativity from things. And so, as well as focusing on emotional intelligence, when I talked about compassion fatigue and all that other stuff, there's, a lot of education, research and things that can happen there. And it, the fact that you were saying that you have how many, 25 new officers, younger officers, it's a generational cultural phenomena that are happening here with lacking interpersonal skills, being able to talk, and, interact with people, find commonalities, we're on our phones, as well as, conflict resolution skills. So when you guys talked about dovetailing de-escalations with, actual examples of use of force or things of that sort, I think the same way of trying to bring in these concepts of interpersonal communication, unconscious bias, we have to unlearn some stereotypes, our historical narrative, of this community. It mentioned also in the memo the Jim Crow Museum, and excuse my ignorance, I don't know if it's one here in Michigan, but a part of the work that I believe Ed Russman is trying to do is looking at how Jim Crow showed up in northern states, in cities like East Lansing, who we like to think that we're liberal and progressive and and want to be absolved from these practices of segregation, of exclusion, that created these standards and benchmarks for professionalism and the normacy of the community and criminalize the other. And so it's all rooted in that. And I think the approach, and you guys have, you guys can hire me or someone outside to do this qualitative analysis, because the information is there. Again, it's just how we are, using the quantitative data and how we are interpreting it and comparing it to historical trends, cultural behaviors, and these phenomenons of interpersonal communication with emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, and compassion or in empathy.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis Dunn. Appreciate the input. So if you don't mind, Deputy Chief Gonzalez and Chief Johnson, could you please stick around if you're able to hear public comment? We saved it for that after your presentation, just in case the community wanted to weigh into some of your different things. I don't know what your time commitment is, but we have a next section here that we'll go through pretty quickly, but I was just hoping that you guys could stick around and maybe just at the very least hear some of the public comment and some of the questions that may come from that, if you don't mind. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. We do value your time, so we appreciate you. And then I'll go ahead and open it up to Vice Chair.
Yeah, I had said I would take care of old business to give Chuck a break in a long meeting. And so item 4.1, the data on home buying trends and community demographics. That is just a report out, a follow-up from last month's meeting. There's no action that we need to take on that. That was just an update that came out of that conversation. Some of the work, if there's a desire to go further into that, it'd be good for us to think about, are there other resources in the community that might be better equipped to dive into the stats than HRC is, or how we can sit with what we want to do with that, if anything. But thank you, Shelley, for following up with that info. Any questions about that?
I know the data was from 2010, and it didn't, have any specific breakdown on by necessarily home ownership by race, I believe, that rental profile. But I wonder if we can commission some type of survey or to get some more information on that. I think it says something that it's not required to disclose their racial demographics when renting or purchasing, and I'm not 100% sure if that's true. I just refinanced, so but I wonder if there's some type of community assessment or something that we can do to look at that. Because even when we consider the median income and individuals, household income, and individuals in poverty, I think that tells a story. And I also think it tells a story of why like Black residents percentage are low, because, the MSU does a good job recruiting, Black people to some degree or another, but they don't stay. Part of it is because of the experience, but in this feeling of being unwelcome, and the lack of opportunity or the cost of living associated with this area, even looking at disparities among interest rates, and what the cost of rent is. And I don't know who can commission that or if they pay attention to that, but it would be nice to have some more reporting on what individuals are paying for rent, and what the average mortgage rate is based off demographics.
I think before we would pursue commissioning that, I think, and this would be a good future discussion item, since this is a full agenda, we want to be really clear about what our goal is in doing that. Like, what are we what are we hoping to do with the information that we find? What is within the HRC's purview to solve or implement in that? And really, that's a great thing for us to have a more formal discussion with, so that we could clarify and justify any further actions that we're pulling from that. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions or comments about this?
No, but yeah, I like, that suggestion and then the priorities that were listed at the bottom of the agenda. And so I'll have some feedback if there is a decision to continue on some work or how I think it applies.
Great. So item 4.2, the HRC Priorities 2021. So just as a reminder, in 2019, in the fall of 2019, the Human Rights Commission went through a multi-month process of assessment of what are our strengths, what are our growing areas, what are the resources we have, and came up with this longer list of what our priorities were as a commission. And then a month or two ago, the current commission narrowed those down. These were the top 3 priorities. So Chairperson Grigsby and I talked about, these priorities aren't, using priorities aren't meant to be project creating. So we don't take those 3 and say, okay, we have to come up with a project that fits within each parameter, but really they are a lens for which we do our work. So when something comes to us from the public, these are the things, and we're grappling with how should we respond, that these 3 priorities are a lens of which we can do our work. So we've asked Shelley if they would be included at the bottom of each one of our agendas. So we literally have them right there for us to reference to and to give us some direction in our discussions, and a framework with which to do our work. And then the hope would be that this fall, since it'll have been 2 years and a majority turnover on the commission, that we will engage a new sort of priority setting process, maybe not the same one or as extensive as the previous one, but building off of that, so that for 2022, we'll have those new priorities at the bottom, or renewed, however that plays out. Any questions or feedback about that? It's a little bit of a change, but it's also hopefully provides a little more continuity in what we're doing month to month. No? Great. All right. Chairperson Grigsby, back to you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Appreciate that, that assist there. So we'll move on to item 5.1, communication from the audience. We're going to adopt a rule pursuant to MCL 15263 subsection 1, limiting public comment to 5 minutes per individual. I'll look for a motion, if there is one, to entertain having a 5-minute limit on our communication from the citizens. Justin, how many people do we have on the line currently?
2.
Okay. Are there any commissioners who want to entertain that motion to limiting public comment to 5 minutes?
I'll entertain
it. Moved by Commissioner Sarr, seconded by Vice Chair Miller. Is there any more discussion in regards to the 5-minute time limit? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Were you opposed, or I didn't see your Councilmember Davis Stein?
I was not opposed. I was in support.
All those in favor, so the motion passed with seeing none, with any nays. So we'll limit the public comment to 5.1 going forward, and I will hand over the reins to Justin, please.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. Just a heads up for you. I'm seeing a few more people join the attendee list as we are getting to this section of the agenda. So I will let you know when we've gone through the entire list.
Thank you.
First caller that I have is phone number ending in 552. phone number 552, you may unmute and address the commission.
Good evening.
Hi.
My name is Kath Edsel. I live at 1026 Daisy Lane. And I appreciate the conversation and the presentation this evening. I am encouraged by some of the ideas that are being brought forth by the current chief in the police department. These are some pluses, and I appreciate that. Yet policing will remain a huge frustration for me, in particularly as a parent of 8 Black children, including one who was arrested for being Black, not in this city, in another city, on New Year's Eve. Charges dropped a month later, but he's had to spend a night in prison, literally prison, for basically being out on the street while being a Black person. It never ends. And the problem is policing is discretionary. You discussed the lean process, and I appreciate that we can no longer randomly run license plates, but with just about everything potentially being criminalized, police officers will always have some reason to say why they ran that license plate. And so I think it's imperative that the police department figure out a way to track those police officers who are running license plates and track that with demographic data and so forth. The same holds for the 20% up to 26% in 1 month stops of African Americans in our community when, as I believe it was Crystal said, they make up less than 7% of our demographics. And as Liz Miller said, you know, our rate is higher than our surrounding communities, and that is horrifying. Sure, when complaints are made, they're never sustained because everything we do can potentially be criminalized. And work has been done to address the public disturbance policies in this city, but there's, you know, so much more that still needs to be done. And as long as policing is discretionary, which it always will be, we are going to run into these problems as long as we have police officers who are biased. I mentioned this once to the chief that we need to look into a way of not hiring people who are biased to begin with. My second point is I'm frustrated. Many of you know why I'm frustrated. I've been denied FOIA documents because of an internal investigation, and that internal investigation has never been brought forward to these meetings. And so when you claim to be transparent, continuously saying you're trying to be transparent, the HRC is just now in 2021 getting internal investigations from 2019. But when I go back to look at the 2019 release of investigations, an investigation that I have tried to FOIA documents from was not brought forth to the HRC. So that lack of transparency is incredibly frustrating. My last point is, it wasn't mentioned, but I would love to know how it's being determined which calls we are sending social workers out on, with or without police officers. Who's making that decision? How is that decision being made? Is there a decision-making tree for our 911 operators? Is it being left to individual police officers? How is that decision-making being made? I'm glad to see it's happening. I wasn't thrilled with it being tied to the police department. Would certainly have appreciated a separate organization such as Cahoots being used. But this is better than nothing at this point in time. But I do feel like how that decision is made is as important as the fact that we are doing that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Just to chime in a little bit on the caller, the articulable reasoning, I think it was, that you guys now have that cancels out the lien inquiries. I just want to go back and say from the month of, I want to say September through February. Without that lien system, we still have a disproportionate people of color being interacted through traffic stops for an articulable reasoning status as opposed to the lien. So even without that being in play, there still exists, from my perspective, that there's disparity with bias, profiling, and possibly racism in regards to who is stopped and why they're stopped in traffic initiated contacts. Did any other commissioners have any comments or responses to the caller? Thank you so much for your information. I hope that within the notes that we are able to address some of those questions that you've had in regards to some of the things you mentioned with the internal complaints and the reasoning to how the social workers are called to a certain place for what calls and whatnot. And hopefully that'll be within written communication for our follow-up questions that Shelley's keeping track for us. Yes, Commissioner Davis-Dunn.
Sorry, one comment regarding the caller when she said that she asks for officers who are biased not to be hired. Are there, I know there are bias, assessments, but has that been considered as a part of a performance measure and criteria to become an officer in East Lansing by taking a bias assessment?
We have not, we haven't gotten started on that path yet, but it's something that we can look at. We do thorough background investigations, and we look at all what they've been dealing with and where they worked and things like that, and talk to neighbors and talk to people who they don't even know we're talking to. The employees don't even have access to their own background investigations because we want to see who we're dealing with. And so that's been our biggest asset, to figure out who we're hiring on. But that's something that Commissioner Kane was talking about, references hiring process, looking in the bigger picture. And I think with us and everybody else we can think about different ways how we can look at screening in the future, try and deal with the culture of our organization and what kind of officers we want to have on board here. And so currently, like I said, if I thought we had, me personally, if I thought we had bad officers here, I wouldn't have came back to try and work here. I do think we have a great organization here, and so, but I think we have room to improve, and I'm willing to help to make those changes, and help the whole department make those changes. So I think that the hiring process is a great starting point, but it's coming up. So
thanks, Chief Johnson. We're just, for the sake of time, we're going to move to the next caller. And just keep that moving because we've had them wait for a while. So I apologize, Commissioner Davis-Dunn. Let's get that out the way, please, if you don't mind. Next caller, please, Justin.
Yes, the next person that we have is Farhan.
Please go ahead.
Good evening. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So I have a quick question. Thank you for answering my call. Why aren't the consequences released when a complaint is sustained? You guys release how long the officer has been with the department, the complaint's color, the officer's color, and yet you guys don't release how the officer, the consequences that you guys gave to the officer. So if you guys could answer that, why isn't that released? Or should I just keep going?
Please go ahead.
All right. When I look at a strong police department, I think of 4 words, transparency, accountability, honesty, and trust. This police department works very hard to put special protections in place, ensuring some records are shielded from public view. We look at, while Tito's case was being investigated, this police department had another case that involved Tony Anthony Logan's Jr., and they sat on that case and waited before they could release that case, because they knew if they released Tony's case and while Tito's case was being investigated, they knew there was going to be a lot of trouble. So this police department cannot pick and choose when they can be transparent, when to be transparent, when not to be transparent. Also, I looked at some of the reports that got released, Dishonesty is a frequent problem in this police department. You got police officers lying about overtime, and yet they were disciplined. Why haven't they been fired? They're lying about overtime. Some of them left their shifts 30 minutes to 40 minutes before they're supposed to leave, and yet you just slap it on the wrist. How's that even possible? If I lie about my timesheet, I'm getting fired. And here you have police officers lying on their timesheets, and then they just get slapped on the wrist. That's it. And then I want to touch on Tony's case. When that case happened, this police department sent only the police report to the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office. They did not include his public complaint. They never included any videos. So it was literally their words versus the Tony's word. And we all know the police officers are going to be believed. So we need to make changes where all of the evidence is being sent to the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office so that the prosecutor can make a good judgment. That's why after the prosecutor found out that there was a public complaint, that there were videos, she dismissed the case. What else? We also saw just a few months ago where this police department released a press release. And in that press release, they had a picture of a Muslim man. Now, I don't have any problem when things like that happen, as long as we're doing it consistently. Now, anytime the East Lansing Police Department releases such press conferences or whatever press releases, they never include the picture of someone. But in this case, they included a picture of a Muslim man. And that is something that I wanted to know, because when I read that press conference, to me, the East Lansing Police Department already knew Najim was guilty. And we live in a country where you are innocent until proven guilty. But by including his picture and saying these are the things that happened, the police department has already made up its mind. And even I saw an article on East Lansing Info where they said the police department never includes pictures of someone. They never do. But in this case, they did. I also wanted to touch about Andrew Stevenson. I know he has a desk job, but last time that we spoke to George Lahanis and Steve Gonzalez, they said that he'll have that job for 3 to 5 years. Now, 3 to 5 years may seem a lot to some people, but to us, it's not much. And Andrew Stevenson poses a colossal danger to this community, especially the African-American community. Mr. Kim, you and I have not met yet. We haven't crossed paths yet, and I look forward to working with you. I know many of the things that I'm talking about right now happened before you became chief. However, these are things that you know about now, and these are things that we expect you to fix as the new police chief. I'm excited to work with you. I think you're a lot better than the other chief, and I look forward to working with you. And I hope to God that we get some of these things straightened out. Thank you.
Thank you, caller, for your comments. We really appreciate your input. Just to follow up, is there a particular labor employee thing when it comes to releasing the outcomes of the discipline? I think it was addressed before a while ago, but I wasn't quite sure. Do you guys have a policy in regards to that?
Yeah, it's actually within the police officer's labor agreement that we cannot release disciplinary action or items from an officer's personnel file. That's currently in the labor agreement.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Did anyone else have any reaction or comments to the caller before we move on? Yes, Commissioner Davis-Dunn.
As that negotiations are up, is that something that can be negotiated since they are public, employees? I think, around, his points of transparency, honesty, trust, and things of that sort. Yes.
There are actually additional considerations as well, including the Bullard-Plawecki Act. So it isn't just the contract itself that talks about that, but there are additional considerations regarding public employees, specifically public safety employees.
Thank you, Shelley. Appreciate that. We'll move on to the next caller.
Okay, we've got phone number ending in 333. You may unmute and address the commission.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Great. This is Chris Root calling from East Lansing in Ingham County. I wanted to thank the chief for being very blunt. I think your statement about being concerned that the data that you shared tonight about the officer-initiated stops being no better at the end of the year than they were at the beginning of the year, and that concerned you, I appreciate. I certainly share that concern as well. I also appreciate that you wrote to the city manager and said, we need to do something about this, and your suggestion to bring in a consultant. I think so many people in the community care about this issue of over-policing of Black people, of inequitable treatment of Black people in our community by the police. It's been raised for many, many years. In the last year, a lot more people have become aware of it. Now, the department has kind of entered a new era of providing more information to the public, which I also appreciate. So we're understanding even more about that now. I think it would be really beneficial if some public entity took a look at the RFP for what this, how the city is going to spend money to find an appropriate, somebody with appropriate expertise to do the kind of study that we need to try to make progress on how the police are treating Black people differently from white people and what can be done to stop it. I appreciate the attention to it and the suggestion to spend extra resources on it. I will feel better about it if I know that somewhere somebody is going to look at that. Is the council going to look at the RFP, given that I imagine the contract might be of an amount that the council will need to approve? Or maybe the study committee could have a conversation with you, or someplace in public where we could hear about what this report is going to be, and what the task, how the task is going to be defined. If it's just going to be benchmarking, how to do benchmarking for traffic stops, I don't think that's what we need. That may be totally off the wall. That may not be what you're thinking, but I don't know what you're thinking, and the rest of us don't know. So as I say, I appreciate the idea of the attention being given to it, that additional resources need to be given. I would have just appreciated if there could be some conversation in a public setting about what that approach is going to be before the approach is committed to in an RFP. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, for your comments. And I second that. I think that's a good idea. I mean, I think if anything, on top of transparency, it just, getting the community involved in some format or fashion publicly really benefits you and us going into that positive direction, more positive direction on the great work that you have tasked your organization with, Chief Johnson. Yes, Commissioner Davis-Dunn.
I think the thing here is to frame it as an equity impact study, because outside of, Black people being over policed, there's other narratives that are influencing the experience of Blackness in this community. And the over policing is a symptom of that. And so I think that's the piece that a lot of people are missing, that they're all interconnected. It's, so it's really an equity impact and looking at, again, the biases that occurs and leads to over-policing, and elements of the social terms of health, the economic impact, and all these things that tie into this larger systemic problem, that makes it so complicated and so complex to really see and understand.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis-Dunn. Justin, do we have any more people on the line?
Chuck, that completes the list of people that we have in the queue. I did just receive an email public comment that I would like to read into the record, if that is okay.
That is very okay. Thank you.
All right, so this is an email received from Eric Williams, and it says, a substantial fraction of the land in East Lansing is off limits to renters. The overlay ordinance allows groups of residents to ban renters in their neighborhood. That makes it off limits to a large part of the Black and Hispanic population. So the city is maintained as a white enclave. Black or Hispanic looking people are out of place in East Lansing and therefore inherently suspicious. We train police officers to be vigilant for people who are out of place. We encourage residents to report to the police when they see people who are out of place. One way to take a bite out of this problem is to get rid of the ordinance that allows neighborhoods to ban renters.
Thank you, Justin,
for the communication.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you, Mr. Williams, for your input and comments. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, and I'll leave it at that. And I know with sometimes my tone and the way that I speak, I just really want to also chime in and say thank you to Deputy Chief Gonzalez and Chief Johnson. This isn't, easy, I would imagine, for you, because I know you take a lot of pride in some of the different things that you've done and are doing and aspire to get done on behalf of your mandate as a public safety servant of the community. And so, we are all in this together. We all appreciate many of the things that you're doing out here in the community. We just, we want to get better. And I think we can, respectfully agree upon, why we need to get better and how important it is. And ever since last year around this time, I really truly believe that the East Lansing Police Department, the city of East Lansing, could be a national leader in some of the issues that have plaguing a lot of the departments around the nation in regards to how they interact with their public safety initiatives in the community. So I just want to say that in closing and really thank you for your time tonight. And please don't hesitate to reach out to any of the commissioners in regards to what we have going forward after this. I guess I want to ask, just in closing to you, so Chief Johnson, this is your first time, doing this whole process. And I just, I wonder how you feel about it. It's something that we would like and talked about as commission doing every 6 months. And so it's not so much gap in time, and being able to have that community connection and that independency of what we're looking at and what you're looking at and coming together. And then also, how important this meeting is, if it is in fact the last time that we really are tackling this, and how we merge this into the new Oversight Commission. The information, the summaries, the things that we have tonight that you provided, there's people on this commission that have fought way before I was fighting for this to get to this certain point and get to a point where we do have somewhat transparency, accountability to some of the different things that we're allowed to see. My biggest concern when we go further on and we do possibly hand this over is the fact that we take a step backwards into what the minimum standard is that we have now with what you're doing. You probably know that I would love to be able to have this be in place and improved upon. And one of the key pieces that we kind of had some stumbling blocks with was really access to video information and case reporting. I think that's going to be essential that you really, really prioritize that automatically, no matter what we do it in the study committee or what we do here at the HRC, that they have somewhat of a pathway, easier pathway than what we did with the subcommittee in regards to being able to understand what you're working on and what you're trying to explain to the community with, so they can give their take and provide more transparency and accountability from the community standpoint. If that makes sense at all. I think that's very, very, very crucial that we build upon what we've done here, and the hard work that people have been on this commission doing, like I said before my time, up to get to this point and not going backwards as we go forward.
No, Chair, I totally agree with you. And like the biggest point I agree with is that we're all in this thing together, you know. And so, you know, I think we're all trying to make everything a better thing, a better place to work and live and things like that. The one of our, as the deputy chief knows, our motto here is a cut above and a step ahead. And we had that motto ever since 2005. And when I got here in October, I said, we got to look at this cut above and a step ahead. And if we believe in that, that means we got to be ahead of the other law enforcement agencies in the country. We just can't be, but we can't be a follower. We have to be in the lead. And so trying to get our command to think about that, to try and embrace this model that we've been having for the last 15 years is something I think the commission and with the police department, that's one of these common denominators that we can work towards. So we're all on board, and we're doing our best trying to get ahead. I was a little disappointed when I found out that I thought we were one of the few departments in the state that we're going to go towards accreditation. And I thought, man, we're gonna get ahead of this thing with this accreditation. But then the deputy chief comes back and he said, well, chief, there's like 80 different departments in the state who are trying to get accredited now. Like, oh my gosh, 80. And so I wanted to be like the first or second one, but we're not there. There's like 80 of us who are trying to get accredited at the same time. But it just tells everybody how important this whole process is nationwide. And so we want to continue this model and try and keep this a step ahead and cut above. And that's we're starting to believe that more and more. So we're just going to keep doing that. And I will be reaching out to you guys in the future, and not too sure how we're going to do that. But I know I'm going to touch base, especially with Commissioner Davis Dunn, just to pick her brain a little bit, talking about this performance appraisal stuff and that kind of stuff, and how we can get the community involved a little bit, and what we can do to find a good instrument that we can all work towards, especially with this community-based policing mentality and stuff like that. So, but I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your recognizing the hard work that all of our staff are doing within the city and with the police department. So I appreciate your recognition on that.
Thank you. Not easy work, and we're in it together, like you said. And I really have high standards for you, and I know you have high standards for yourself. And
That's
so
correct.
we'll keep moving on. So I appreciate you tonight, gentlemen. Thank you. You're more than welcome to stay if you choose to, but I think we are at our point in time where you do have that option to be able to do your thing. So thank you so much. And we'll be in contact very soon. Hopefully.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it, Commissioner. I appreciate that. Thanks for the invite. Bye-bye.
We believe in you guys.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions and your attention to this. And I think in a lot of ways, the city of East Lansing is ahead of the game, with having HRC, having this future oversight. There's a lot of positives that we have, unlike so many other communities. So I just want to say that officially, that I don't take that for granted. And I don't take it for granted that we have two Deputy Chief Gonzalez and Chief Johnson coming in here and being set under the fire with some of the different things that we're passionate about as a group. All right, I'll move on to 5.3 and stop talking here for you. And we'll go to written correspondence. The first line item on here is the Cape Public Hearing info. And this was associated to the CDBG grant situation of kind of really how that meeting was applied for. Shelley, did you have any comments to this at all? Because my question is like, I know the HRC can make recommendations in regards to that, and somehow I don't know if we've had history in doing that. I would have to maybe ask Liz, but it seems like we were out of the loop in the process of what happened this year. So could you help me out with that?
Sure, absolutely. A couple of things, Chuck. You're right. The process to award CDBG funds has changed throughout the year. Several times the process has changed. Initially, it was very time intensive and involved a lot of people from various commissions and groups and employees, and it's kind of been pared down as the funds that are available to be granted have been scaled back, unfortunately, from the federal government. So that process has changed. I would be happy to have the employee that's in charge of that program supply a written correspondence to you that kind of outlines what it currently is. That's Amy Schlussler-Schmidt. She's done that in the past, so that you know what the current process is. The second point is this public hearing that happened in December was not the actual award, right? You may have caught that in the correspondence. It was a required public hearing. It wasn't the awarding. That's done at a later date. So this is the midway point. So this public hearing was required before January 1st.
Gotcha.
Timing of that. That decision had been made who gets the award prior to that.
Understood. Yeah, I was totally blindsided, and I felt like I've been playing catch up with this, and I really appreciate that, getting that information for staff so we can look at it as a whole, because there are concerns about kind of really some of the different ways that money maybe could be distributed and distributed into the right areas that we could possibly weigh in as HRC with our mandate. So thank you, and thank you for reaching out to her. You said Schlussler-Schmidt, you said? Appreciate that. All right, we'll move on to this next line item, MSU DEI. I believe that was submitted by Commissioner Sardar. Is that correct?
Right.
Did you want to speak to that, Commissioner Sardar, to the group?
No, I just wanted to bring it to your attention, considering the fact that Commissioner Tyler is also part of the task force, and there may be ideas and resources that we can share and benefit from each other.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate you doing that. I love it when, especially the quieter ones on our commission, contribute in ways that they like to. So we appreciate that. And I did see a YouTube video of Commissioner Tyler talking in regards to this memo or this email that you sent. And it looks like they are moving forward as well, because we had some concerns last year as a commission with some of the different things that was going on over there. And so it seems like, a lot of things are happening, and a lot of things that are happening, came through us. And so I think everyone should give them a small pat on the back in regards to that. And, it shows how important it is that, we have work to do going forward. So thank you, Commissioner Sardar, for that written correspondence. I'll move on to the K. Kilpatrick pardon, and that was submitted by Commissioner Cannon. If you don't mind, can you speak to that, please?
Are you referring to the newspaper article I shared with you?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I brought that to the attention here because it was a controversial pardon. Some of you know that Kwame Kilpatrick was a controversial mayor and was accused of a lot of corruption, and ultimately he was convicted and was given a very long jail sentence. I think it was 28 years, and he has served about 7 of those years, and the former president pardoned him in December, so he is free now, and I think last I read, he was heading out of state. I don't know if that was temporary or permanent, but it brings to mind that biases can come from many places, and a lot of people felt that his sentence wasn't long enough because he only served 7 years out of 28, and others would say, however, his original sentence was unduly rigid for considering the crimes he committed. And I thought, since we're interested in such things, I just wanted to call it to the attention of commissioners.
Thank you, Commissioner Cannon. And controversial is the word in regards to the issues surrounding that. I definitely will say that. And you're right, biases go all the way. Yeah, all the way, both ways when it comes to that. So we appreciate that. We'll move on if anyone does have any more reaction or comments to that line item. What we have at the very line item is we had correspondence coming in from Christine Root, and really the breakdown of stops and policing through initiated contacts through traffic. And, it was a great analysis of residents and non-residents and population, all kind of stuff. I spoke to it very loudly earlier tonight in regards to what those things are. But it's a great 4-month sampling of kind of really how people are interacting with the police through traffic violations, and how despite what we had going on this summer, despite what we had going on last fall, despite some of the changes that the police department has made, the numbers, as Chief Johnson took responsibility in, the numbers are not better. And so I thought that written correspondence was a great breakdown of that sampling of that, and it speaks for itself in regards to the meaning of it all. I'll go ahead and move on to line item 6, to commissioner comments and concerns. I'll open it up if anyone had anything they wanted to chime in with.
I do.
Yes, Commissioner Kennett and then Vice Chair Miller, please go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to thank you for allowing us as much time as we had tonight for our interactions with the police chief and deputy chief. I know it took up a good portion of our meeting, but particularly so since we only see them once a year currently, that it was helpful to have that much time for the dialogue that ensued. And I wanted to thank you for that commitment.
Thank you. And if you heard me, I slipped in there that, we may have to see them in 6 months if we don't have things turned around. And Chief Johnson has said a couple times.
I would welcome that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. Yes, Vice Chair Miller.
Yeah, I just wanted to share on behalf of Commissioner Catherine, who couldn't be here tonight. She asked if I would speak to, we had a great meeting with her and I and Crystal and Shelley earlier this month, and talked a lot about like onboarding and new folks. And Catherine just asked to share that her and Shelley are working on some new commissioner resources and a binder of materials for that onboarding. And she's really looking forward to that work. And I'm very thankful that she is doing that.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any other comments or concerns? Yes, Commissioner Davis-Dunn, please go ahead.
I don't know. I mean, we didn't touch base, or I don't know, just for the general public, the update on the discriminatory neighborhood covenants, and that, the last update, of where the bill was, and that it was, I guess, testified and supported by Representative Anthony on December 2nd. I think we missed that under written communication. So just wanted to put that out there, and understand that there are some modifications to the agenda based off, the fact that we had this opportunity to talk to the new chief and all the changes that are underway. I would like to try to figure out if there's a way to formalize follow-up questions and feedback that all commissioners may have regarding some of the things that is shared with regards to resolutions or, recommendations or whatever that are being given and, outwardly. Because I would like to avoid any like redundancies, just kind of like saving of my time. But I had a few more follow-up questions. And I guess it would have been more so for regarding the recultural alignment. And if we could also have, we're focusing on the police department, which is the entry point for many people into the criminal system. And I wonder if there was an opportunity to talk to the city attorney and members a part of the court system to look at at that point of accusation or the report of an incident or encounter with the police, other interventions or measures that could be taken to kind of reduce the economic impact and disproportionate criminalization of Black people. We saw the data from the Part 1 and Part 2 crimes and court-ordered arrests, or contacts with Black citizens, things of that sort, that we didn't really get to kind of dive into So just putting that out there.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis Dunn. And thank you for making sure that, we are on.
You're faded out.
Can you hear me now? Okay, sorry about that. I was just thanking you, Commissioner Davis Dunn, in a long-winded way. Commissioner Sardar.
Being the quieter one and in the interest of time, I had refrained from commenting when the two police chiefs were speaking. But I do plan to write to Chief Johnson a thank you note. And I think there's no ideal path to resolving all the issues that have been building over the years. And there's no better proof than the difference that we saw today when Chair Grigsby talked about how it needs to come top down in terms of setting the vision, and Councilmember Bacon saying it needs to go bottom up, starting with the 49th person. But I think Chief Johnson is in an ideal position to hit the reset button, and that's what I want to write to him. And he could use the event on February 17th, where they're going to award the police officers, to perhaps appreciate them and let them know that they are good officers. There's no such thing as a bad police officers, just that we have bad practices which we need to eliminate. But he is in a unique position, I believe, to say that we need to hit the reset button and embrace a new vision so that the change is embraced by all the officers in the department positively and not looked down upon as being thrust upon them. So I just wanted to give you a heads up that I'll write to them. I think protocol demands that I copy you all, which I will do that. I will include all of you in my written communication to him, unless I have to route it through Shelley. I will.
Yes, Commissioner Sardar, please route it to Shelley, and then she'll disseminate it out to us, just because of the OMA concerns with that. Please.
I will do that. Thank you.
So is that the same way, like recommendations and feedback? So like if people are sending recommendations and feedback, it's routed through Shelley, and then Shelley is sending out, that's the standard?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. And that's a very important clarification, Commissioner Davis. So thank you. Yes, please, in order for us to talk without us being in this format, everything goes to Shelley Neumann, and she sends it out in a way that complies with our rules. So yes, absolutely. However you want to do it, whatever you want to say, anything you want to say, send it to her and she'll get it out to you. She's very good about that. We'll work on it. And I think it's a great way for us to get work done in between our meetings as well, when we have that format in play for us to be able to do that. So yes. Any other commissioners have anything else to say?
I just want a little point of clarification. So Shelley, will it come out when the person sent it, or will it come out as a part of written communications in the next agenda?
What is, I guess it kind of depends on what it is. And is it, that's what I kind of want to know too. I mean, is it, if it's feedback, I'm thinking of like the questions we're forwarding to the police chief, right? So I'm going to collect all of that. And I'll be checking in with you to see if I've represented your questions correctly, or if you have it written down, you could give me a head start and send those to me. And then I would send that to the police, to ELPD, to the chief of the DC, and that would be included in written communication.
So we wouldn't get them back as a group before you sent them out?
I would, anyone that submitted to me, well, we got to talk about this. I will work with the people that have the follow-up questions, I guess. If you send it to me, it's a process that will take me several days. You're saying you want to see the entire list before it's sent?
Yeah, like, if there's a way to kind of a running document, I don't know. That's why I'm trying to figure it out. This is part of the process, things that I'm struggling with, and maybe we can have this off the record, but I just wanted some clarity around various things, because like some of the kind of issues things I struggled with was like around the resolution. People had feedback and then wasn't sure what individual had feedback, or and if it, how that was contributed, in the resolution, that it wasn't, we never got that back. We found out after the fact in written communications once it went through council. Even recommendations regarding the use of force subcommittee, I got a correspondence from chair that, we were ready to make recommendations were being made. I don't know who and where those recommendations are, if the larger commission signed off on them, or, things of that sort, like just, again, around that communication transparency piece, and to make sure that, I'm not doing extra work for something that's already been done, or something that already has left, the stables, or whatever the term is. So just trying to create some, or understand the formalities around various things. Even, last month, the letter that went out to the Covenant, Brookfield, we were confused because we thought that was a recent letter, but that went out months ago. So I guess within the new leadership, if, we can figure out how we're communicating, how and when things are going to be shared back to the larger commission, that would be helpful for me as a new member, and as a person that wants to contribute and be a part of the process, to understand how to engage.
Thank you. Any other commissioners have any other comments, questions, statements? All right, seeing now, we'll move to item 7. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Cannon. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Davis Dunn. Any discussion on that? None. Thank you so much tonight. Great work, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate you. Thank you, staff that are listening in. Thank you, Councilmember Bacon. Thank you for all your work tonight on these issues.
Thank you, Chuck.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Right. Take care. Were you